In the realm of intimacy, there's this common cultural narrative that tells us men are primarily visual, tactile, and physically orientated. And there's truth to that, of course. But the mistake, the really damaging oversimplification, is assuming that's all there is, because what men often don't say out loud, perhaps because they've never been given the language, is that the most profound turn on isn't about technique, it's about presence. Now, what do I mean by presence? I'm not just talking about physical availability. I mean attentiveness. I mean emotional and psychological engagement. That rare state of being where both people are actually in the moment, tuned in to each other, not distracted, not thinking 5 moves ahead, not trying to live up to some script they picked up from media or memory, just there fully. What most men love during foreplay, and often don't even know how to articulate, is when their partner is clearly and genuinely present. When every touch, every look, every breath feels like it's coming from a place of desire rather than duty. When it feels like you're not just participating, you're invested, interested, alive in the moment with them. You see, we live in a performance-driven culture, and that culture seeps into intimacy, often unconsciously. People start to think that sexual connection, especially foreplay, is a kind of audition, a space where they have to get it right, where there's a right rhythm, a right sound, a right sequence of behaviors to hit the right reactions. But the problem with that mindset is that it takes you out of the moment. It replaces authenticity with choreography, and in doing so, it dilutes the one thing that makes foreplay actually meaningful: connection. When a man senses that you're performing, whether that's faking enthusiasm, forcing moans, or replicating something you think you should do, something inside him disconnects. He might not say anything. He might not even realize what's off. But there's a subtle fracture in the experience, because men, even when they're physically aroused, are extremely sensitive to emotional incongruence. They can tell when you're checked out, or when your body is present but your mind is elsewhere. And that's not about insecurity. It's about a craving for something real. Because here's the deeper truth. Even in our most physical moments, we're still looking for emotional signals. We want to know that our presence matters, that we're not just a body being tolerated or a tool being used or a checklist being completed. We want to know you want us, that your desire is voluntary, spontaneous, and sincere, that you're here not because you have to be, but because you choose to be. This is why presence matters so much. It's not about being flawless. It's about being honest, about making eye contact that lingers, about breathing together in rhythm, about saying, I want you, not through perfectly timed words, but through unfiltered energy. That kind of presence makes a man feel seen, not just sexually, but existentially. And that's when his guard starts to drop. That's when his breath deepens, his touch slows, his mind stops racing, because now he's not just in a physical experience, he's in a shared one. Foreplay, at its best, is not a warm-up. It's a sacred pause, a mutual exploration, a space where both people can drop the armor they wear in the world and say, let's be real here. Let's meet each other here. And for men who are so often starved of spaces where emotional honesty is allowed, let alone celebrated, that kind of presence is transformative. So if you want to give a man something he deeply loves during foreplay, don't overthink the moves. Don't rush to the technique. Start with you, with your presence, with your genuine desire to be there in that moment with no distractions and no scripts. That's where connection begins. And connection, not perfection, is what opens the door to everything else. Because the truth is, presence is the most seductive thing you can offer. It says, I'm not here to impress you, I'm here to meet you. And when a man feels truly met, he won't just respond physically, he'll respond completely. Because nothing touches a man more deeply than knowing that your desire isn't a performance, but a choice. One of the great myths of modern intimacy is the idea that men are always in control, that they prefer it that way, even need it, and that relinquishing that control somehow weakens them. The truth is far more complicated. It's true that men often carry the weight of composure, They're trained from an early age, implicitly or explicitly, to regulate their emotions, suppress their vulnerabilities, and provide stability in moments of chaos. And in many ways, that's a strength. It's the kind of self-governance that civilization is built on. But the cost of that control, particularly in intimate moments, is often overlooked. Because what's left unspoken in all this is that most men are longing for a space where they can let go, where the burden of holding everything together, their emotions, their expectations, their performance, can be suspended. And nowhere is this more powerful or more needed than during foreplay. Now, this may sound counterintuitive at first. After all, isn't foreplay the time where desire builds, where one might expect men to lean into control, into leading the rhythm? But look closer. Often, men are stuck in their own heads, managing their arousal, trying to read your responses, anticipating the next moment, wondering if they're doing it right. They're locked into this invisible psychological checklist, and it prevents them from being fully embodied, fully relaxed, fully human in that moment. What men deeply crave and rarely get is emotional permission to stop performing, not to disengage, but to surrender the internal tension, to be in a space where it's okay to receive without needing to offer more, where they're not expected to constantly prove their desirability, their prowess, their usefulness, where their arousal isn't just accepted, but welcomed, without suspicion, judgment, or pressure. This doesn't require elaborate gestures. In fact, it's usually the smallest things that matter most. A hand that lingers without needing to escalate. A voice that says, you don't have to do anything right now. A look that says, I want you, not just what you can give me. These moments disarm the performance mindset. They tell a man implicitly that he can be fully in his body, fully in his desire, and still be safe and will be held. That kind of freedom is rare for men because so often men associate value with doing, with providing, fixing, moving forward. So when a partner communicates physically, emotionally, that it's okay to just be, something inside him starts to soften. And that softening, paradoxically, leads to deeper strength. Because now he's not acting out of pressure or fear of inadequacy. He's responding from a place of calm, of confidence, of connection. This is also where trust grows. Because when a man is given the space to let go and he sees that nothing falls apart, that the moment doesn't become chaotic, that his partner doesn't withdraw, he learns something profound, that intimacy doesn't require control, that he can let go and still be loved, still be enough, still be seen as a man. And this is where so many couples get stuck. They confuse masculine strength with constant leadership, constant direction. But strength that never rests eventually turns into rigidity. And in the most intimate moments, rigidity is the enemy of connection. The real magic of foreplay, the kind that changes the atmosphere between two people, happens when both partners feel free. Free to express, to pause, to explore, to trust. If you want to offer something to a man that's deeper than touch, something he'll remember long after the moment is over, offer him this: permission to let go. Show him that he's safe when he's not steering. Let him exhale without losing your admiration. Hold his vulnerability with reverence, not hesitation. When you do that, he doesn't just feel turned on, he feels alive. And that kind of aliveness, that depth of shared trust, transforms the physical into the sacred, because it tells him something no performance ever could. You are not just a function. You are someone worthy of rest, of softness, of being fully received. Sometimes the most masculine thing a man can experience is the freedom to stop proving that he is and still be loved. There's something deeply human, almost ancient, about our need for affirmation. It's not shallow. It's not fragile ego. It's recognition, evidence that we are seen, that our presence matters, that our being is acknowledged not just by the intellect, but by the body, the breath, the voice of another. And for men who are often raised in environments that reward silence, stoicism, and restraint, restraint, this kind of affirmation becomes both rare and incredibly potent, especially in moments of intimacy. During foreplay, men aren't just seeking physical stimulation, they're scanning for something far deeper, evidence that they're desired, that their masculinity isn't merely tolerated or assumed, but celebrated. And that celebration rarely happens through grand gestures. It lives in the subtlety, in the micro interactions that communicate without theatrics. You matter here. You belong here. A gentle touch on the neck, a hand sliding slowly across the chest, a whisper just above breath that names something real. I love the way you feel, or I want you right now. These aren't lines from a script. They're acknowledgments of presence. They're emotionally encoded messages that say you're not invisible. And that feeling that he's not just there to perform or to give, but to be experienced, it lands somewhere deep. Because here's what's often missed. Men, particularly in intimate contexts, are far more sensitive than we think. Not sensitive in a way that implies weakness, but in a way that points to how tuned in they are to the emotional climate. They're reading you, your tone, your movements, your pauses. And what they crave isn't just permission to proceed. It's proof that their being, their body, their touch is not just accepted, but wanted. This is where the emotional meets the physical. You can trace the nerve endings, map the brain regions that light up during physical affection, but if the emotional current underneath is cold, the whole experience becomes flat. But when touch is infused with intention, when your fingertips communicate sincerity, when your voice doesn't just speak but invites, something entirely different happens. A man starts to relax. He starts to respond, not with control, but with presence. He stops thinking and starts feeling. And this feeling that he's desired not for what he can do, but for who he is, unlocks a different level of intimacy. It allows him to meet you in that space, not as a performer, not as a protector, but as a full participant, a human being whose need for affection, appreciation, and affirmation is not an embarrassment, but a beautiful, natural reality. Now, it's important to be specific here. Affirmation isn't flattery. It's not exaggerated praise or empty compliments. Men don't need to be coddled, they need to be seen. So when you offer words, let them be grounded, let them reflect what you're actually experiencing in that moment. You feel so warm, or I love the way you're breathing right now, or you always make me feel safe like this. These aren't pickup lines. They're mirrors reflecting something real back to him. And the same goes for touch. It doesn't have to be constant, but it should be conscious. Men notice when touch is robotic versus when it's intentional, when it's done to fulfill a perceived obligation versus when it's used to express presence and emotional engagement. A hand placed over the heart, fingertips tracing the jawline. The small stuff speaks loud when it's done with care. All of this, when practiced with sincerity, communicates something that no amount of technique can replace. I'm here with you, not just physically, but emotionally. And that message, subtle though it may be, rewires the dynamic of foreplay from mechanical to meaningful. It stops being about escalation and becomes about deepening, depth of attention, depth of trust, depth of connection. So there's one truth to carry forward, it's this. Affirmation doesn't dilute passion, it intensifies it. When a man feels verbally and physically affirmed, he doesn't just relax, he expands, he shows more of himself, he risks more of his vulnerability, and in return, he offers something far more powerful than mere arousal. He offers his presence, his depth, his unguarded self. Because the truth is, a man won't remember every move you made, but he'll never forget how you made him feel wanted. If you study the anatomy of human connection, not the biological structure, but the psychological response, you begin to see that desire isn't a solitary flame. It's a fire that feeds on feedback. It grows or it dims depending on how we are received. And for men, especially during foreplay, the most powerful aphrodisiac isn't a specific move or position. It's responsiveness. It's the presence of another person who's fully engaged in the moment, whose energy says, I'm here with you because I want to be. You can't fake that. You can simulate excitement, you can perform arousal, but the human nervous system is incredibly adept at detecting authenticity. A man will intuitively know the difference between touch that's meant to check a box and touch that responds in real time to him, to his voice, his tension, his rhythm. That's what I mean by responsive energy. It's when foreplay becomes a kind of dance, not a series of steps, but an organic exchange, not performance, participation. This is more important than it might seem, because men in general are wired socially and biologically to take initiative, to lead, to guide the moment. And while that initiative is often healthy, even necessary, it becomes draining when there's no feedback loop. It's like speaking into a void. You begin to second guess, is she present? Is she enjoying this? Am I being too much? Not enough? And that uncertainty, if it persists, becomes a source of self-doubt. But when a woman responds, not with exaggerated theatrics, but with authentic engagement, something changes. His confidence stops being theoretical and becomes embodied, because now he's not navigating blind, he's attuned. He can sense her excitement, feel the reciprocity. And that co-created energy heightens not just pleasure, but trust. Let's break this down in practical terms. Responsive energy doesn't mean constantly reacting. It means tuning in, breathing with him, moving toward him when he moves toward you, making eye contact that's not just decorative, but anchoring. Sounds that aren't forced, but come from a place of connection. That's what creates a feedback loop of desire. One person responds, the other mirrors, then amplifies. And what starts as simple arousal becomes emotional synergy. This, by the way, is why passive compliance never leads to deep fulfillment. When one partner is doing and the other is simply receiving without presence, it flattens the experience. The moment becomes transactional rather than transformational. But responsiveness shifts the axis. It says, I'm not just allowing this, I'm participating in it. I'm shaping it with you. And that's not just physically validating, it's existentially validating, especially for men who often feel the pressure to initiate without reassurance, to lead without knowing if anyone's following. When a man sees that his partner is emotionally and physically with him, not just present, but responsive, he feels more than excitement. He feels trusted. And when he feels trusted, he gives more of himself, more openness, more creativity, more care. We sometimes forget how much intimacy is built through mirroring. When someone reflects our emotions, our tension, our rhythm, we feel seen. And this is true in foreplay, just as it is in any other form of communication. You could say that responsive energy is a language, one that doesn't require words, but speaks volumes. It says, I'm not just letting this happen to me, I'm in this with you. What's also important here is rhythm. In music, the most powerful songs are the ones that breathe, the ones that speed up and slow down with intentionality. Foreplay works the same way. When a partner matches tempo, adjusts pressure, adapts instinctively without rigid planning, you move from action into flow. You stop thinking and start syncing. That's when it stops being me and you and becomes us. This kind of responsiveness requires vulnerability, because to be present enough to respond, you have to let go of your script. You have to listen, not just with your ears, but with your body. That's hard to do in a world that prizes performance over presence. But if you can step into that space, if you can mirror each other with sincerity, the dynamic shifts completely. Foreplay becomes less about reaching a destination and more about building a shared experience in real time. And the beauty of it is, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be available emotionally, energetically, spiritually. Because when a man senses that the woman he's with is truly there, not just physically, but in spirit, he's not just turned on, he's moved. And that movement goes far deeper than arousal. It touches something ancient in him, something sacred. Because in the end, what men remember isn't the perfection of the moment. It's the feeling of being met fully with nothing held back. There's a delicate paradox that exists in intimate moments, especially during foreplay, between structure and freedom, between safety and spontaneity. And this is particularly meaningful for men, because one of the most psychologically significant experiences a man can have in that space is not just feeling wanted or being touched, but being allowed to lead, to explore, to initiate, to create an experience rather than simply follow one. But let's not confuse this with dominance or control in the shallow, caricatured sense. What we're talking about is expression, the ability to move through that intimate space with confidence, curiosity, and a sense of being trusted. That kind of freedom doesn't come automatically. It's earned through rapport, through mutual respect, and perhaps most importantly, through non-verbal permission that says, I trust you to take the lead here. This is something deeply embedded in male psychology. Biologically and historically, men have been primed to take initiative, not because they must control, but because they're wired to pursue, to protect, to provide. And in intimacy, that wiring doesn't just disappear, it becomes even more pronounced. The desire to guide the flow, to respond to a partner's reactions, to try something new, to improvise without fear of judgment. This is central to male engagement in foreplay, that it only truly activates when the space is safe enough to explore without hesitation. And what creates that space isn't silence or passivity, it's encouragement. Subtle signals that say, I'm with ye, take me there. That encouragement, whether through eye contact, a moan, or even a moment of relaxed stillness, gives a man something essential, the permission to express himself through intimacy. Because that's what leading is in its healthiest form. It's not about control, it's about expression, it's choreography, guided by mutual trust. Without that freedom, men can often default into caution. They hold back, they second guess, they play it safe. And that's not because they're disengaged, it's because they're uncertain about how their initiative will be received. You can see it in the hesitation of the hands, the pause in the eyes, the overthinking of every move. The moment becomes cerebral rather than instinctual. It becomes a performance instead of a dance. But when the space is open, when there's that unspoken yes in the atmosphere, then men begin to create. They try things. They read the moment. They respond rather than rehearse. And here's where something truly special happens. Their creativity becomes a form of intimacy. The way they move, touch, tease, it stops being about technique and becomes about presence, about listening to the body of the person they're with and shaping an experience that is both physical and deeply emotional. And here's the deeper point. Allowing someone to lead is an act of trust. And when a man feels trusted, not just tolerated or tested, but genuinely trusted, he becomes more than just physically engaged. He becomes emotionally responsible. He wants to give. He wants to satisfy. He's not just in it for himself. He's in it for you. Because that freedom isn't just liberating for him. It binds him to the moment with more care, more focus, more integrity. Now, of course, this freedom isn't about losing boundaries. It's not about blind submission. It's about co-creation. When both people in the room understand that leading and following are fluid roles, not rigid positions, they begin to move together like musicians in a jazz ensemble. Sometimes one person takes the lead, then yields. Sometimes there's a crescendo, then a pause. But the beauty is in the movement, in the willingness to explore the unknown with openness and mutual respect. It's also worth noting that the freedom to lead does something else for men. It pulls them out of isolation. See, many men experience emotional loneliness, even in relationships, not because they aren't loved, but because they don't feel seen in the parts of themselves that desire to express, that desire to explore. And so when they're given that space in intimacy to lead, to discover, to be bold, it doesn't just arouse them, it heals them. It tells them you don't have to be small here. You don't have to suppress your instincts. You can bring your whole self. And when that message lands, it changes everything, because now foreplay isn't just about pleasure, it's about restoration, a reintegration of the masculine spirit with the emotional body. A moment where the man is not merely touching, but being touched back by trust. And in that trust, he doesn't become reckless, he becomes responsible, he becomes attentive, and above all, he becomes present. Because the truth is, when a man is free to lead without fear, he stops trying to impress and starts trying to connect. And in that connection, he gives not just his body, but his heart. We often talk about physical intimacy as though it exists in isolation, as though it's a distinct bodily ritual detached from emotion, psychology, or deeper human needs. But that illusion fractures the moment you pay attention. Real attention. Because what you start to notice, particularly in men, is that the physical connection isn't just about stimulation. It's about affirmation. It's about being touched in a way that communicates you are seen, you are enough, you are not alone. Now, it might sound simple, but it isn't. It's profound, especially for men who are often conditioned to silence their emotional wells, to compress vulnerability, to soldier through life with a kind of stoic detachment. Not because they don't feel deeply, but because many of them were never taught how to translate those feelings into words. So what happens? Physical touch becomes the language that emotion speaks when words fall short. You can see this truth manifest in the quiet moments when a hand lingers on the chest, not for arousal, but for grounding. When a kiss isn't rushed, but held. When fingers trace skin as if mapping out someone's story. These are not merely erotic gestures. These are gestures of recognition. And for a man, especially one who carries invisible battles, those moments can cut through years of internal silence. That's what I mean by emotional affirmation through physical connection. It's the way someone's touch says, I value you. Not just what you do, not just what you provide, but who you are. And in those moments, intimacy shifts. It stops being mechanical. It becomes redemptive. Now, why is this important in the context of foreplay? Because this is the stage of intimacy where trust is either built or broken. It's a space charged with anticipation, yes, but also vulnerability. And for many men, what they truly crave in that space, beneath the surface level desire, is assurance. Assurance that they matter, that they are not just instruments of performance, but human beings worthy of gentleness, of attention, of love. We don't talk enough about how many men move through life without consistent, meaningful touch. Outside of sexual relationships, men often experience very little physical affection. Society reinforces the idea that male bodies are for strength, not tenderness. That to be touched in a way that isn't transactional is somehow emasculating. And yet, in the context of a trusted partner, that same man may be desperate for a moment where he can let his guard down and simply be. So when foreplay includes not just stimulation but emotional presence, when it becomes a space where a man is held, not handled, something opens up. And what opens isn't just his body, it's his trust. And once that trust is present, everything else follows. Deeper connection, more honest communication, a stronger bond outside the bedroom. It's all rooted in that primal affirmation. You're safe here. You're wanted. You matter. We often look at intimacy through the lens of what happens next. But the truth is, what happens in the beginning, in those early physical, emotional exchanges, sets the tone for everything else. When touch is affirming rather than demanding or indifferent, it builds something that outlasts the moment, security. And security is what frees both people to express without fear. Men don't need perfection in those moments. They don't need grand gestures or perfect scripts. What they need is sincerity. A look that says, I'm not performing, I'm present. A touch that says, I see you. A kiss that doesn't just seek pleasure but offers comfort. When those elements are there, the experience becomes transformational. Not just physically, but emotionally. And that transformation leaves a mark, not just on the skin, but on the soul. And here's the psychological insight that underpins all of this. When a man is affirmed through connection, he's reminded of who he is. Not the mask he wears for the world, but the person underneath, the one who doubts himself, the one who longs to be understood, the one who, for a brief moment, doesn't have to prove anything. That is what intimacy can do when it's rooted in care. It doesn't just bring bodies together. It heals emotional divides. It reconnects the individual with their humanity. And that perhaps is the greatest gift we can offer each other in a world that often reduces men to roles, tasks, and expectations. Because in the end, what stays with the man is not just how you touched his body, but how you touched his being. And if you do that with truth and care, you don't just ignite desire, you inspire devotion.